Unmuted.
Hello, and welcome to Mountain Standard Time. I'm your host, Nathan Giede, and today I'll be joined by Bill Barnes, who's going to discuss with us the value vote ballot. He's coming on in just a little while here. Before that, we've got our opening statement. Again, never forget, we run here on subscriptions, as well as some of our advertisers and our sponsors. We'll be, of course, giving an endorsement to one of our sponsors in a few seconds here. But the first and foremost thing to understand is that if you follow us on Facebook or you follow us on YouTube, if you subscribe to us online and actually support independent journalism here at the Western Standard, you help provide a free voice to the West of Canada, and to everybody who loves freedom and is tired of the tyranny that we've been living under since the lockdowns began and beforehand. One of the topics we constantly visit on the show is that all of us, whether we're talking about Canadians who are just tired of their rulers, Westerners who are particularly tired with Ottawa, or just freedom-loving people who want people to stay out of their lives, and certainly anybody who's trying to manipulate them and kind of give them rules that they don't really want. We don't have a way of expressing our voice together, and that's one of the reasons I've brought Bill onto the show today. His primary idea is that there's a way to express solidarity if we change the system by which we both elect people, but also by the way we express our political will. So I'm going to let Bill talk more about that, but that's something that we've been talking about this show since day one. This is episode 29, and we're still looking, still searching, and hopefully have found now a way of expressing that solidarity in the West. One of the places where this might have been very useful actually was the COVID restrictions. We all know that COVID-19 went from just being a dreadful, scary kind of disease that was unknown to the biggest excuse in history for why our lives had to be completely controlled. It didn't matter what aspect of our lives either. You want to travel? No, that has to be curtailed. Do you want to shop at a mom and pop shop? No, that has to be curtailed. Do you want to go inside of a place of business? You have to wear a mask. Do we know that any of this stuff works? No, not really, but you must do it or else you'll be excluded from society and denigrated or fined or even jailed in the case of some pastors. And for some reason, of course, you can get the disease at church, but you can't get it at Costco. So that's exactly a particular point where we might disagree on lots of other things, but having a way to have expressed our voice in solidarity together through some kind of balloting system or some kind of referendum system would have been preferable to the way things went. And so I think that, again, just kind of dwelling briefly here on the COVID-19 stuff, that's where we'll start this morning, though right after we get our endorsement of I believe we're doing the coffee thing again. But we'll go briefly into the latest COVID-19 news now. But make no mistake, Canada has suffered long enough from systems that fail to show our true feelings about the country's situation, as well as feelings of its populace. It's time the government returned to the hands of the people so we can make a better world for everybody. And that's regardless of where you sit on the sovereignty question, right? We need a better way forward in this country, and we're not going to get much further along the way if we don't have a way of expressing that. I believe that we have our Resistance Coffee sponsor, so we got to throw that up, that overlay. There it is. And Resistance Coffee, they're an interesting company. They're kind of playing off the whole thing of, you know what, people are buying all sorts of items, and those items are donating to woke causes. So whether you're dealing with Procter and Gamble, or you're dealing with some other big corporation, all of that money is going to some kind of leftist, woke, completely, inhuman sort of system that's actually racist and sending us all back into the Stone Age. And Resistance Coffee is trying to go the other direction. Like, you know what? We're locally made. It's out of Weyburn, Saskatchewan. It's locally made. You can order it online. And every time you buy coffee from Resistance Coffee, what ends up happening is they do actually take a small portion and they make sure it goes towards things that increase our freedoms instead of decrease them, and fight the good fight when it comes to our freedoms and our privileges as Canadians, as free citizens in a free country. If you use the Western Standard promo code, you can get 10% off your first order, I believe. So do use the Western Standard promo code. Let them know that you are watching this show, and support support a local business that's attempting to help make Canada a better place instead of a more woke place. We're going to carry on here to some of the things that are in the news today. One of the big ones, of course, is we've got a joint statement on COVID-19's response. We'll bring that on to the screen share here in just a moment, but we're going to bring you kind of a live sort of commentary on what's been going on. So essentially what's happened is Dr. Bonnie Henry's BC, the provincial health officer, obviously, and Adrian Dix, who keeps playing second fiddle to her. I love doing my own color commentary on this stuff. It's fun. Today, we are reporting that 74.2% of all adults in British Columbia and 71.9% of those 12 and older have now received both the first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. In total, 3,685,340 doses of Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, and AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccines have been administered in BC. And then 345, so essentially 350,000 of which are second doses. So, I mean, we're on our way to being fully vaccinated, I guess, by the standards of our provincial health authority. I remain unvaccinated. I have no plans to get vaccinated, and I remain a part of a community of people that are also not, for the most part, planning to get vaccinated. Really, it's become a conscious decision. People who wish to do so, like, it's not like we denigrate them within our community, but we also don't, we don't promote it to anyone. I have no desire to get vaccinated. I personally, I could understand how, if somebody was from a particularly vulnerable demographic, why they would feel compelled to do so. But for myself, I don't come from a particularly vulnerable demographic. Yes, I used to smoke, but I'm still under 35, and I never had any, lung trouble in my life and that sort of thing. I'm not diabetic. I've gotten to far better shape since about Christmas time. I'm not in the high risk demographic. I'm not a triathlete anymore. I was one once, but the point is that we can't be handing this out to everybody. I guess we can. Got 3 million of them out there. I'm not interested in getting the dose, or the jab, as people have come to call it, because I just don't feel like it's necessary for me. Where I'm really concerned, actually, is that some people are talking about the fact that there might actually be COVID-19 passports, vaccine passports. And I think that's really, really, really dangerous, because quite frankly, I think that's an offense against our civil liberties. If you didn't want to get the vaccine, that was up to you. And the idea that somehow your life can be curtailed because you didn't get the vaccine, I don't think that ever happened when it happened with smallpox, when it happened with anything else that was an outbreak. They did quarantine people who had active cases of things. Perfect example is going back to biblical times, at leper colonies. That's true. It's true that there have been the segregation of people who have active cases of things that are quite contagious, or chronic. But that's also gone by the wayside. And I don't think it makes any sense. Here we have actually some evidence out of Manitoba. And it's funny how that works with Manitoba. Manitoba is slowly becoming, it's weird. It's interesting. I was in a morning call with the whole Western Standard crew. And this morning, the point that was made was that Jason Kenney is, into the negatives in the polling, and somehow John Horgan is doing quite well still. He's having some faltering now, probably because of the old growth stuff. People think it had to do with the lockdowns and everything else. It's like, no, not really. I think it had to do with the old growth stuff. We can get into that after our segment with Bill. But the truth of the matter is that whether you're Kenney, Ford, or Pallister, you are just hated by your populace, which is bizarre, because all three of those governments swept into power, and those premiers, which are all Tory premiers, PCs and Conservatives, United Conservatives, a Progressive Conservative, and another Progressive Conservative, they all swept into power because people were sick and tired of the left-wing governments that had come before them, and they wanted something different. I think with the NDP in Alberta, that was a little bit different. I think Notley could have gotten a second term, to be honest with you. But and I do think the NDP will rule Alberta again. I absolutely believe that. I know that there's some people probably in the comments who aren't happy to hear those words come out of my mouth. But the truth of the matter is the NDP are here to stay in Alberta. And that's because the demographics of Alberta have changed. And because, quite frankly, for 40 years, while the PCs ran the place, they ate them out of house and home. They stole everything. They took a lot of money out of the wealth of Alberta, and they should have put it towards something smarter. But the issue here is that with the vaccine passports, we've got that up in the wings here. It's happening live. We're watching it happen live. So in Manitoba, we have a situation where fully vaccinated Manitobans to get secure immunization card, a new secure immunization card confirming full immunization against COVID-19 will mean Manitobans with 2 shots can travel within Canada without quarantining on their return and enjoy expanded visits at hospitals and personal care homes, Manitoba's premier says. If you had told me, so I've been in Manitoba under Pallister's government twice. I was there back in 2017 when a buddy of mine was basically the right-hand man of the premier, the current premier. Not to throw my weight around or whatever. I'm just saying that Buddy was a pretty big deal over there behind the scenes, but like he was well known, saw the premier every day. I got to spend some time with him while I went through Manitoba the first time. The first time I went up to Churchill back in 2017. I only go up to Churchill during 150s. So Manitoba's 150 and Canada's 150 were the 2 times I went up there. And the funky thing was that, this was the thing. They had just been swept into government. They were really proud to have taken over. Manitoba had been run under the NDP for a million years. So they had gotten involved in the right-wing element of that party was really, really voracious. They're like, yeah, no, we're finally in charge and we're going to set this province right. And it's just been so badly run for so long. We're going to take care of this. And if you had told those people back in 2017 and the burgeoning hours of the first Pallister government that, hey, you know what, your premier is going to be the one to impose a vaccine passport on his own people, they wouldn't have believed you. They would have laughed you out of the room. They would have said, yeah, no, why don't you go cry with all of the, I don't know, the socialists who work in the cafeteria because we're coming for them next. They could be a bit nasty. They weren't exactly. I love them to death, but I don't have time for that kind of mean-spiritedness, to be honest with you. You take over government, be kind of magnanimous, and honestly, frontline service workers in the cafeteria they're not. Those aren't the people that are wasting the money and the time. It's management and it's the managerial class. We all know that. But the point is that I think that we need to understand that when it comes to the Manitoban situation, that is not what anybody would have believed back in 2017. I could have walked around the legislature and poked everybody and been like, hey, do you think this will happen in 3 years, 4 years now? And it'd be like, no, that wouldn't happen. You're crazy. There's no way that Pallister would let that happen, or any of our MLAs would let this happen. There's not a chance. And that is that's a reality now. That's a reality. And as far as I can tell, the Manitoba government is the first government in Canada to push that first, to have it be official. Even the feds have talked about it, but they haven't done it. I don't even know if any of the Maritimes have done it. I'm kind of looking over my producer here. In his mind, I don't think everything's happened yet. We'd have to double check that. But the Maritimes just went into full lockdown. Remember, that's what they did. They just built a border wall basically between themselves and the rest of Canada, and they just waited for a year. And now I think they essentially, as long as people don't come into their territory, they're just kind of having normal life now, as far as I know. I'd have to check in with another buddy of mine who just traveled all the way from Newfoundland out west here. So the point that I'm going to try and drive home here is this is Canada now. This is where we are. And again, this isn't coming out of Toronto, this vaccine passport thing. That's coming out of Manitoba. Nobody's idea of a radically left-wing progressive place. It still has rules around where bars can be inside of hotels and VLT machines. Manitoba is a prairie province through and through. It makes Saskatchewan look more, just not as prairie-ish. You'd think that Saskatchewan would be it, but no, Manitoba kind of actually takes the cake in these counts. But nonetheless, it you wouldn't think that, right? You wouldn't think that that'd be the place where vaccine passports begin, but here we are. You know, of early stage of COVID is the big topic. So it's getting the shots. I think that that's actually a good point. There should have been more discussion of how there could have been prevention around regardless of one's opinion of the virus. And I know that we've got some people inside of our comments here. I mean, I mean, once again, I me just simply referencing my life for like 2 seconds has generated all sorts of negative feedback. That's okay. I just happened to go to Manitoba. That was the only point. The point being, though, that with prevention when it came to COVID, etc., I think we need to look at a few different things. One of the things that went wrong when it came to the questions around COVID was whether or not they were going to treat this like any other virus, and therefore they could have used some of the methodologies that we've used with other viruses, right? We all know that, more vitamin D is good for you. We all know that more sunshine is good for you, which was kind of ironic that we locked everybody in their houses. And again, to Pamela's point, for early stages of COVID, there were methods available, just like there are methods available with a cold. Everybody on planet Earth has methods that they use to try and get ahead on any disease that they receive that isn't, something that requires expert medical care. And we all have both folklore as well as kind of, over the counter pharmaceutical techniques in order to try and work on these things. But unfortunately, a lot of that was cut off. And some of the experimental treatments around COVID, particularly hydroxychloroquine, which of course was an old malarial treatment medicine, been around for years. That got denigrated and used back and forth. I think if there's anything we can learn from 2020 and the whole COVID experience, it's the whole fake news narrative problem is pretty real because the issue is that there were people who were trying to experiment with this stuff and then share their genuine interest in what might have been working, what might not have been working. And the news media, again, just to try and get rid of President Trump. Like that's one of the evils of these things. That's why we try to be as open and candid as we can be on this channel and on the Western Standard. This is the non-cancel space. This is the freedom of expression space, right? We try not to swear on this show, and we try not to deny objective reality like the sun and the moon and the stars. Outside of those two parameters and common sense, we just let people roll on this show and tell us whatever they're feeling and thinking about things. And the issue here, in no uncertain terms, is that when it came to COVID-19, they were so determined to defeat President Trump that they were not going to allow even the remotest possibility of something that might have helped people and kept people from either dying or at least suffering really bad adverse effects from whatever this virus was, terrible as it was. This is an issue. This is an interesting one. We'll bring up Carmen's comment here in Vermesitin as well. That's why India did so well. They switched that. So this is ivermectin. Sorry. So this is interesting. Ivermectin is actually something that's given to farm animals. That's something that's given to farm animals in order to basically dose them for parasites, I believe. I have some people that I know that are attempting to use this stuff. I have no idea how it's going for them. And they're using a dosage that's for animals. So again, that's something else. I'm not a medical doctor, and I don't play one on TV. So I'm not going to give you any medical advice on the question of ivermectin. All I'm going to say is, if you are using something that wasn't intended for human use, just be careful with that. That's just don't. Maybe look into that a little bit and think about that a little bit. So that would be good. But Damien, Earth-centrics. Yeah, no. I mean, heliocentrism. This is the old problem, isn't it? You go down to the freedom of expression channel, and sometimes you cross the lines. I remember somebody saying once, it's like, you know how to outflank somebody who has interesting ideas about something. Like, well, I don't believe in this and I don't believe that, and but I'm not a conspiracy theorist. And it's like, they're like, well, have you seen the moon lately? And then you just turn back to them and you go, well, do you believe in the moon? Are you silly? It's kind of funny that way. One other thing that we're going to look into here, and my producer is giving me the chance to try and share screen myself. We'll see how well this goes. It's not going to go very well. We've got the Times columnist up here, and the reason we're going to just jump into that quickly is that that's probably going to be very helpful. My producer has decided to take over when it comes to sharing a screen because I'm not any good at this. Well, I'm trying to learn more because we've got this commute thing going on now, so I'm trying to learn how to do this stuff. So here we go, and share, and hey, did I pull that off? Yes, haha. That's awesome. You guys are getting to watch me live. I literally downloaded a virus once thinking that it was Apple iTunes. Like, you guys don't want me to run the tech on anything, okay? That's important for you to understand. We're trying to have fun at this show, and I try to be as honest with you guys as I can. So let's get on with it. Okay, so the Times columnist. I know, never show the opinion of your competition, blah, 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 don't care. Agriculture Minister Lana Popham declined to answer many further questions Tuesday about government interventions to get an Agricultural Land Commission's rejection of an Indigenous Addiction Treatment Center overturned. So this has to do with my hometown here. Carrier County Family Services wants to build a facility near Vanderhoof at the site. Okay, well, near my hometown. At the site of a non-conforming old lakeside lodge in the Agricultural Land Reserve, but the commission rejected the plan. It cited the law Popham changed in 2019 to strengthen the mandate of farmland protection and minimize consideration of other issues. Okay, so we've talked about this a few times on this show, and darn gun it if we ain't going to talk about it again. So what happened in British Columbia, so British Columbia's got a lot of things wrong with it, let's be clear. For those of us who are watching elsewhere, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, all the way to Ontario, sometimes our viewership goes. The problem is in British Columbia, we have these issues where we have Agricultural Land Reserve, okay, that's one layer of government. We got the provincial government in general, right, helping with crown land. Then forget it. I mean, if you're near a fish-bearing stream as a farm, now you got the fish cops involved, which of course was federal, and then you have your regional district, which was, hey, look, Damien's all the way from Ontario. There you go. So somebody's already on lunchtime. Good for you, Damien. So the point is that when it comes to the ALR in BC, this is a hot, controversial topic. We don't want, it was an NDP idea to come up with the ALR and some of the kind of BC assessment stuff, the kind of land assessment stuff and land survey stuff that happened throughout the 70s in the one-term Barrett government when that came to pass. There is some great stuff that happened there. To be honest with you, we actually have to be completely candid about this. Barrett had some smart ideas around what to do when it came to trying to make sure that British Columbian land stayed British Columbia's and that it didn't just all get bought up by a foreign interest or just get developed madly by people who clearly didn't have the best ideas of what to do. So that was a kind of starting place for that, and that was great when that happened. But then things took a turn for the worse throughout the ALR's history, to the point now where, ironically, the ALR might as well be the keep people from farming commission or keep people from being able to afford the ability to farm. Like, you can't afford it because there's no alternative means of production on the farm that might actually earn you a living while you also try to farm and try to blend the farming system with, say, I don't know, maybe you do have an Airbnb or something else and you're just trying to make some money go, or you need a secondary residence. So that was the big one. The big one was the secondary residence thing that happened in that was the 2019 version, I think. So in the 2019 world, we had when the NDP government came in, they changed the laws, and all of a sudden with Bill C-51 and C-52, I believe, they managed to create a huge problem for farmers everywhere, because all of a sudden non-conforming structures were suddenly put under a whole new bunch of scrutiny, and secondary residences became very hard to kind of build and do and change in a way that needed to happen. So this became a problem, because, I mean, what else were we going to do? Obviously, farmers and people throughout British Columbia that are on rural properties, they need to be able to do generational farming, and without having that ability, they had it taken away from them. So I'm just going to flip back to this briefly. I think I used this button. Oh, almost. Maybe this one. There we go. My producer is blown away that I'm actually learning how to click on stuff. He thinks that this is a miracle. It is a miracle. They wanted to build a facility near Vanderfield at a site non-conforming old lakeside. We just read that. And so the Agriculture Ministry raised objections and appeared non-supportive during the first application. But now it is reversed course and is endorsing the proposal. Popham's deputy minister even wrote a letter of support to the First Nations, stressing the importance of the proposal, which is now in the package before the quasi-judicial ALCB. This is an important turn of phrase here. Quasi-judicial. Quasi-judicial is a terrifying phrase. Whenever you see the word quasi-judicial, what you are seeing is we are an unelected group of people that make the kind of decisions that you can't reverse. That's what quasi-judicial means. So they're not binding in a perfectly legal sense. They're not binding in a perfectly legal sense because they're quasi-judicial. This isn't a court of law, and they actually have no real authority except for what they've chartered from elected representatives. So by orders in council, they've come to exist, and even by legislation, they've come to exist. But these aren't courts of law, and they have no legal precedence or authority in the sense that they don't have any expertise in the area either, and they're basically just technocratic little organizations that play the go stop game. You get to go, you get to stop, duck goose. You aren't allowed to build it. You aren't allowed to build it, but you are. Well, what was different about that guy? Well, you see, he signed this form. Okay, but my structure looks the same as his. Can you give me that form? No. Well, I'd like to appeal this decision. Okay, that'll be $1,500, and you won't get it back even if you win. Why? Because we say so. So that's what quasi-judicial means. And quasi-judicial boards exist everywhere. The Assessment Authority, the ALR, inside of ICBC, quasi-judicial authority is terrifying. And every time you see that word, your back should crawl. It's very scary. I guess we're just going to kind of get to the end here. The point is that I think it was actually in the headline. I'm not talking about it anymore. Agriculture Minister says the ALR intervention. I think that's kind of the key here. For some reason, the NDP government, when it could very easily actually win some rural seats just by appealing to people in the rural area at their level, which is that if their taxes went down a bit, or if it became a little bit easier to farm, or if the regulations around farming decreased a little bit, they'd be more than willing to help out with things, but and probably to vote NDP. But the reason that they didn't vote NDP and that they won't vote NDP again for a long time is precisely because of this. It's the agriculture minister isn't interested in helping them. And this, which makes no sense, because I don't know why the NDP want to interfere with small family farming, because one, that's where all the jobs are when it comes to farming at all, because in the big farms, everything's automated. It's small family farms that actually employ people. And two, no one knows their land better than the farmers. Right? They care about their land. Like, they care about what's going on. They care about their animals. I see my brother never knew nothing about farming until a couple of years ago. And my brother knows more about every single animal, even from just the 3-4. I guess he's been there about 5 years now, but he's only been on the farm for 5 years. And he's been there for all of it and building the buildings, and it's made him a better carpenter. It's made him a bit of a spot welder. Like, it's an incredible lifestyle, and it's not for everybody. I'm not saying it's the highest lifestyle, the best lifestyle. But it is pretty incredible, and I really enjoyed my time on the farm when I was there. But the point is that I think that you need to understand that when it comes to the ALR and how things are going with this current NDP government, there's a lot of issues for us farmers, and it's kind of a problem, and we don't have a way of expressing that. But luckily, we're going to be bringing somebody on very shortly here. We're going to bring Bill on, and he's going to explain to us how to express ourselves when it comes to this stuff. I need to figure out how to click out of here. Randy, can you help me? Yeah, that's better. I'm totally lost. And we've got Bill. Bill, can you hear me? And we've just got Bill muted. We just got to get him unmuted. And Bill, I need you to unmute yourself. I think you're muted right now. Yeah, we're going to have to unmute ourselves here. There we go. Bingo blango. Hey, it's not a problem. So, Bill, you are, of course, the creator and author of the Value Vote ballot, the Bill Barnes system of balloting, and you have some ideas, I'm sure, about how we could express ourselves to our agricultural minister, et cetera, on various ministers about COVID and that sort of thing. But why don't you just take us from the top, Bill? How did you get involved when it came to creating your balloting system, and why did you think it was important?
Well, I have a terrible bad habit. I listen to people. And when I listen to them, I can hear the frustration in them every election, between every election, of how basically we were electing people to govern us, but they were always interpreting it as we had elected them to rule us. And we have no, at that time and even today, we do not have a system available that can override anything that the rulers want to do. So listening to people, I realize that if we're looking for a political messiah, which basically we need, it cannot be him or her. It has to be us. And without a system that allows us to have input, you've got nothing. Now, as I say, we hire them or elect them to govern us. So therefore, I can't take all of their power away, but we have to take some of it away because they're taking us to hell in a handbasket.
And that's where, I mean, we have to start with everything, which is that, I mean, obviously getting the universal ballot was better. Having universal enfranchisement was better than not having enfranchisement. That's where things started. People agitated for a long time for people to get a vote at all. Then they had an agitation around what that ballot was going to look like, whether it was going to be secret or not. And finally, of course, having first of all, it was all men and property holding men, then all men, then finally women and men, though first the married wives of soldiers. Now we have universal enfranchisement. So some people might argue, hey, we have universal enfranchisement. Isn't that good enough? What's wrong with the balloting system we have right now? What would change about it? Don't people have a way of expressing themselves right now?
Well, you can keep the bums or throw the bums out. That's the only expression you've got. It isn't that we don't have an opportunity to vote and that more and more people have an opportunity to vote. But once it's all done, then you have to wait for 4 years before you can do anything about your bad decisions. And the only decision you can have is to throw them out and bring in another group who won't do anything that is not on their agenda. And lots of times their agenda is not what we want. And you mentioned farming. Take farming as a classic example. There is no way at present for farmers across Canada to become one voice, not one political persuasion, one voice. That's the difference. They can be an NDP or a conservative or a liberal, it doesn't make any difference, but they have to have one voice. And our system does not support that. Our system is a divide and conquer system. You either have to be NDP or you have to be conservative or whichever. And if a party comes up with something that you like, then you have to give up your own political philosophies and walk across and vote for that person that maybe you have no value in their system at all, except for that one point. Well, to me, that's the stupidest way to run anything. So with my system, you get to stay with your philosophy because I think that's important. If you're a conservative or a liberal or an NDP or a Bloc Québécois, whatever you are, if that's who you are and that's where you see value, you should be able to stay there. If Trudeau decided he wanted to walk across the floor and become a conservative, it would be front page news. Everybody would be talking about it for months. But every time you step into the voting booth, you have to make the decision of whether you're going to stay with what you believe in or whether you're going to cross the floor and vote for somebody else that you don't believe in. And that doesn't mean a thing. So we're not representing the people. We're not letting the people be represented. And there are lots of issues. And again, we'll go back to the farming. I think it's a classic place to start with. You go back to the farming, there is no system out there at present that can unite their voice as one. So they are always going to be struggling trying to get to the common sense position. That doesn't mean to say farmers should control the world, but they should have a system that can give them some control in their lifestyle, whether it's farmers or whether it's loggers or whether it's doctors. I don't care what it is. You have to, everybody has specific needs in their area that are not being addressed. Now, you have to be able to have a system that can draw that to the forefront. And in my system, again, going back to the farmers, if we took something like the cost of fertilizer and say the cost of fertilizer, they up the tax on it 50%, then you can go to the next election and there's a part and a B part to the ballot. A part, you choose the party that you want. B part, you then put in a suggestion. For example, all the farmers could get together, regardless of what party they voted for. They could get together and say, for example, lower tax on fertilizer. Put an X in the box, yes or no, whichever way, that you want to believe it. And if 5% of the people that vote that election want the taxes dropped on fertilizer, then it has to go to committee and it has to be looked at, regardless of what the ruling party's platform is. So you've taken away some of that total blind control that we have given them, and we've put some of it back into our hands. Now, that doesn't mean to say that because 5% decided that the tax on fertilizer should be dropped, automatically it gets dropped. No, it has to go to committee. It has to be studied all the way across the board, all the pluses and minuses of it. And then if the committee decides that, yes, this is a good idea, then that's what they recommend to the government. And the government cannot go against that unless they can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that their idea or concept behind it is better. But most of the time they couldn't. So the farmer would get what they need, and so would the rest of us.
And it starts all in the same way, I think, which is that fundamental dissatisfaction with the system itself. I believe that in the book that you wrote on this on the value vote ballot, you start by discussing that there was the 88 election, I believe, and you're seeing that the PC candidate is obviously going to be carried. There's no question, but there's these ballots that are going to have to be destroyed because they're spoiled. They're not legible on what's going on. Can you talk a little bit about that as kind of the starting place of that inspiration?
Well, that's sort of what I guess was the catalyst that brought this whole thing together, because I've been doing a lot of thinking about it as I was going along, but couldn't quite figure out how to put the power back into the hands of the people. And it was the 84 election that brought Brian Mulroney to power. At the time, I was a signed up, paid up member of the Conservative Party of Canada. And as such, I was also a director for Frank Oberle. And as such, they asked me to go out to a little place called Pouce Coupé to be a scrutineer. Everything went great, of course. No problems within the voting system at the time. But when it was all over and they were counting up the ballots, the landslide that Mulroney had got and the landslide that Brian or Mr. Oberle got, I mean, there was no need to count anything. It was done. But there was about 6 ballots that had been destroyed in that little voting section of BC. And the attention that was paid to those 6 damaged ballots or destroyed ballots or mismanaged ballots, whatever word you want to use, it was about a half an hour that these people kept going around and looking at it and seeing if they could somehow make it so that those votes counted for something. And it dawned on me that if that's where all the attention is in the voting system itself at the ballot box, then that's when we as a voter have to have our say. And therefore, that's where it comes out with Part B, whether you can actually make a suggestion, whether it's fertilizer costs, whether it's universal daycare, whatever. But it has to be something that most governments are running from because it won't get any votes. So they run from it. We are this country. We are the ones that need certain things. And we are the ones that have to say to them, I don't care, you got no choice. You have to at least look into this. I don't think we have the right to tie their hands to force them to go in directions that maybe are illogical only because we happen to be a large crowd. But we have to get them to the point that they have to look at it at least. It doesn't happen. Classic example of a political messiah, whether you like him or not, is Mr. Trump. Now, I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent to him, but in the 4 years that he was there, he made numerous changes. Good, bad, or indifferent, that's everybody's personal opinion. Very shortly after he was out, everything that he had changed was changed then. That's how long a political messiah lasts. Only as long as they're in power or until they die. So we have to be the political messiah. It has to be us who can stand up and say, no, this is what we need. This is what we have to do. And then there has to be a method that it is democratically looked after.
Right in the middle of the 2015 election, some people noted that Justin Trudeau, our current prime minister, did say that the 2015 election was going to be the last election held on first past the post. Obviously, that didn't materialize. They did do a bunch of committee work. They did meet with people. They had, back in the days when we still had town halls before COVID. It's another anti-democratic thing about COVID. Nobody gets to consult with their political leaders anymore because they're not allowed to meet them because they might get infected. The funny thing, well, infected with some good ideas for once, eh, Bill? The thing is that he said this. He said that this would be the last election held on first past the post. They did the consultation and they stayed with first past the post. Was that just another cynical move by another cynical class, or do you think that maybe they didn't want to jump ship just yet? It was too complicated to get into another voting system, or does it reinforce the power that's already there?
My personal opinion is that it was first past the post is beneficial to politicians, not to us, but it's beneficial to them. So they're not going to look into anything. And I have proof that they did not do any research. Now, when he made that suggestion and I knew about my system, I wrote a letter to every person sitting in Ottawa, informing them that this system was available. I did not sell one book. I did not get one phone call. I got absolutely total silence from them all. And then Mr. Trudeau come up in Ottawa and he said, we couldn't find anything. So we're going to stick with what we got. I then wrote another letter to them all and told everybody what they already knew, that he was a liar. And I knew he was a liar. And I can honestly say he was a liar and is a liar because nobody checked my system out. And even after I wrote that letter, I still never sold one book. I never got one phone call. I got nothing but silence, except I will say that the NDP must have noticed that I had sent this letter because they put me on their donation list asking for money. And that's all I got out of it. Then I talked to our local fella in town here, Mr. Zimmer, because I had given him a book at the time to read, and they just lost it. So I mentioned to him after that I had sent these letters and the rest. Oh, he said, well, letters, he said, we get so many of them. He said, most of them we don't even read. So where the hell is our democracy? Where the hell is our representative? How do we ever say anything? When I was with Mr. Oberle, he told me that a petition is useless because they look at a petition the same as they do a letter. You can have 500,000 names on a petition, but it counts like one letter because they know that those 500 names are the opinion of the person that did the original write-up of the you know the word I'm looking for. Anyway, and so that was the reason that I made sure I wrote 35 members of parliament, wrote 335 letters twice, but got no response. And then was informed, well, that's because we get so many letters, we don't even bother reading half of them. So where is our representation? Whether it's first past the post or single transferable vote, I don't care what system you've got, unless you can put some teeth back into the power of the people, you've got nothing.
And this is where things get kind of interesting very quickly, because the fact of the matter is that John A. Macdonald built this country, you know, while being under the influence, with two secretaries in his front office. That was it. That was the prime minister's office when John A. Macdonald was alive. It's essentially a couple of secretaries to help him with correspondence. That's it. Today, the prime minister's office has, you know, 1,000 people that work at it. It's certainly dozens and dozens. And by the time you count all the bureaucrats that are involved with the PCO, you've got the core of the government has no less than probably 1,000 hands and feet running around doing things, and yet they can't get to their people, and they can't appeal to the people. The people don't feel heard. They don't feel heard by their local parliamentarians. They don't feel heard in their local provincial capitals. They don't even feel heard in their local city halls. And there's only 8 people at City Hall, and there's only 80,000 people in this town. What do you think that disconnect comes from? Why don't people feel heard by their representatives? Don't representatives know that the people are who elect them, and if they don't hear them, they might get unelected?
Politicians are not stupid people by any stretch of the imagination. They know all of those things, but they also know they don't have to do anything except what they want. There is nothing out there that forces them to do anything other than what their political platform is. All the decisions are made in the war room prior to the election. Only thing that ever comes up on the platform is that which will possibly get us elected, get us votes. Then some of those have probably a little star beside it that once elected, we can just forget about that. But that'll get us elected. And going back to this business of how many helpers they got, when you think about it, I wrote 335 letters. Now, how many people were available to read that book out of that? Maybe 5,000 people in total? Not one of them were asked to buy the book or to read it or to make a phone call. That's how much they pay attention to us. And in my letter to them on the first trip around, I mentioned Lester B. Pearson and how he was the one responsible for the Suez crisis, solving the Suez crisis, and how Canada was put on the map for doing such a great thing. And I was saying to him, this is another chance for Canada to be put on the map to solving a problem within democracy. Now, to me, I would think we would want Canada to be front and center in the world, but they couldn't have cared less. They never even took the time to look. And that's the sad part of politics. They don't have to take a look. And as long as they don't have to, they're not going to. And again, I'll go back and I'll just use his name, Mr. Trump. It doesn't matter whether you elect him or not. The fact is, there was a big change made. But how long did it last? It was 4 years. Anything that was good in it is gone. That's how long anything would last, even in Canada or in England or Australia or wherever. That's how long a Messiah lasts, just the length of time that they're in power. But they last forever if it's put into the hands of the people. Because we would I call it a friendly revolution. Every election becomes a friendly revolution. Because every election you can say, no, you can't do that. You have to do this, or you got to look into this. All the time. You're constantly pulling on the reins, steering the government ship down the road. But we got nothing. As long as first past the post, single transferable vote, I don't care. 27 parties, it makes no difference. If you have no say, you've got nothing.
Something that does seem to have changed since, well, really, in a sense, basically, probably from the 80s onwards. The issue becomes very quickly, in my opinion, that somehow even local candidates that kind of get elected on a populist sort of platform, it doesn't matter. When you send somebody to Ottawa, or you send them to Victoria, or you send them to City Hall, they come back representing them to you instead of the other way around, and they become part of the party machine. They become lockstep with the party machine. I've observed this with even some friends of mine. I have a friend of mine who's been elected to Parliament. He's a good guy. I went with him in Trinity and everything. A good guy, not a bad person at all. But like, I remember a kind of, and I'm not saying that opinions don't mature with age. They do. You know, I'm guessing I won't be as radical as I am today in another 5 years. Like, that's fine. But nonetheless, it's not just a change in tone. It was a change in tune. It was a key change as he came back from Ottawa and had really become lockstep with who was in charge there now and what was going on there now. And that was even after Harper was out of office and no longer a sitting MP. So I just kind of sat there and heard that change in his voice and his cadence and the way that he represented himself. I really wondered about that. Someone who I thought would never be able, no one could tame him in that sense, politically speaking. I spent he was always going to be, a wild one, and he did completely change. How does this happen? I mean, did you see this with Frank Oberle when you were dealing with the back in the 80s?
There's two things that are involved. And one of them was a meeting I had with Frank Oberle about an issue when I was raising my family. They were teenagers at the time. And of course, being teenagers like to push the rules and check things out. So I went and I was talking to Frank because when it boiled down at that particular time, the teenagers had all the rights, the parents had none. So I went and I was talking to Frank about this particular issue and the rest of it, and we must have chatted for maybe an hour. And when I got ready to leave, he said, Bill, he said, this was a very interesting conversation. But he said, I'm going to tell you right now, absolutely nothing's going to come of this. I said, why? What's up? Because he said, you don't have a lobbyist. He said, well, when we're in Ottawa, we're constantly bombarded by lobbyists. Those are the people that we pay attention to because we want to get them the hell out of our hair. And at that particular time, this was back in the 80s, it was the women's issue and the First Nations. He said, those are the two issues that we look at all the time. Yours, he said, will never see the light of day. The second thing is in BC here when, I forget the fellow's name, but he voted against BC Rail. And they made him a backbencher, took away all of his power, and then he ran independently after that, and of course lost out, and that was the end of it. So you either fall in line or you're absolutely useless. And that's unfair to all of us who hire those people to represent us, not them.
Mm-hmm. It's becoming a growing problem. One of the other issues that's coming to the fore here is that it appears that there's a lot of foreign influence. So not just internal party influence or internal lobbyists, but also foreign lobbyists, foreign interests, particularly from China, that have definitely infiltrated the federal government, certainly provincial governments, particularly British Columbia, because it does face the Pacific and therefore the Chinese domain of power, where China hopes to project its power, the same way Japan was attempting to 70, 80 years ago. And so there's definitely a tension in this country where foreign interests are beginning to influence the way that we see things, the way that we do things, and how we vote. Do you think that's another thing that resists change when it comes to our balloting system or giving more power to the people, is that it would threaten foreign interests?
Well, I don't know who's all behind the power, but if China has any say at all, then yes, it would be part of it. It's the unfortunate part. We don't know who represents us. We get total strangers that a bunch of strangers choose to represent us, and we have no say in the matter. For example, if you belong to a secret society, that is not front and center in your platform. But that should be part of what's front and center. You should know who a person is, what they represent, who they support. So when they're sitting there, if they happen to be a sworn member of the Communist Party of China, and you don't know it, you're just shot in the dark. And that's the trouble with politics. You're always going to have people in there that are, I won't call them corrupt, but have their own agendas or their own concepts of life and the rest of it. And that's fair enough. But what isn't fair is that you and I and everybody that's listening here doesn't get a chance to have their opinion validated. That's where the problem is.
And not only that, but not just not validated, but also we have these values tests right now, but they're all pointed in very odd directions. So if you have a problem with abortion or euthanasia, or perhaps the idea that people can only be a certain number of genders and not 72 of them, that gender and sex are connected, and therefore there are only two genders outside of the obvious caveats of hermaphroditism, etc. If you have those kinds of values, if you happen to believe in God, if you happen to have questions about COVID and what was going on during COVID and the lockdowns and why we could go to Costco but not church, all those sorts of values, which some of which are expressed in rather easy tones. They're not always shouted from rooftops. It's said very calmly by many people. You're not allowed. You're not allowed to say anything. And if you and you'll be pushed out. So somebody riding right now, like they might have the popular support of a lot of people that they're an anti-lockdown person or that they think masks are silly, but they'll be beaten out by the Canadian media, the Canadian political establishment. They won't be able to get elected. And it's kind of funny because I mean there are plenty of other opinions that are far worse, or people getting paid by people that are far worse, and that doesn't seem to bother Canadians at all. I don't know why.
Well, unfortunately, I think that politics has got us all to the point that we think there's nothing we can do about it, and we behave that way. And you should be able to have. I'm against, for example, a whole bunch of parties. I think that all you need is two because we either like to spend or we like to save, one of the two. So politics basically fits in there. Now, if somebody comes along, let's say a green person comes along and looks and says, "Holy mackerel, there's nothing being done to protect the environment." The system we have forces that person to go and start up a whole new party. Then they have to work like hell in hopes that they can finally get a seat, and still nothing necessarily has to be done. So the whole thing is designed so that nobody wants to do anything. And it's designed, the, the thing I find the most humorous about politics is when politics got started, of course, the people said, well, we have to have some rules. So they said to the politicians, how about you guys making some rules? Okay, they said. And the first rule they made was we can't be held responsible. And that's the way we live. They can do whatever the hell they want and they're never held responsible. None of them ever go to jail. Nothing ever happens, you know? And so when we have no power, we have no power. Now, I don't want to run the government. I don't want to be the person that is uh, making the decisions. People a lot smarter than I should be doing that. But I don't want to be totally ignored as I am. I have to have the right to be able to say, well, for example, Harper lost the election the first time around because he wanted to put soldiers in Afghanistan. And the Canadians said no. The second time, the Liberals were doing such a terrible job, we had no other choice. We had to vote for Harper. And the first thing he done is he put us into Afghanistan. Why? What did it accomplish? Absolutely nothing. The Canadian people didn't want it, but they didn't want the Liberals at that time, so they had to take Harper. And there you are. You're stuck now with a war that you didn't want. So the system is chaotic. It's crazy. And the sad point is we leave it in the hands of total strangers and we just say, do whatever you want. You got 4 years. Or maybe it turns out to be 8 years or 12 years. But in the meantime, we just have to sit back here and hope like hell they don't totally destroy the country. And that's a stupid way to run a country. We wouldn't run a business that way. Why do you run a country that way?
I think one of the reasons that we can run a country that way, well, we can't. It's bad for us. But I mean, the reason we try to is that the idea that, well, I mean, you can just keep pumping money out. Unlike a business, the country prints its own money, and therefore it can just keep handing it out the door in wheelbarrows if it wants to. I think that creates a lot of debt and a lot of problems, and it's actually a really perverse thing to do to people because, of course, they're gonna have to pay it back someday and whatever. But I think a lot of it's tied up in that. People don't know the value of a dollar anymore, or at least our leaders don't. And then they're just printing more of them, which is actually making them worth less. And expecting somebody else to pay for it. They won't be here when that problem comes to the fore. They're just here to get elected.
I disagree with you. They all know what's going on, but it's all about power. It's all about prestige. It's all about personal wealth. And by going along with all of the stupidity that's out there, they just get richer and richer. They couldn't care less. They know that printing money is a stupid idea. They're not stupid people. They know that. But their platform says, keep your mouth shut. We'll give you promotions. We'll give you money. You can have investments. You can do all kinds of stuff. How many politicians do you know that walk in poor and come out rich? Pretty well all of them. Why? Because it's a corrupt system. What are we doing about it? Nothing. We just wait 4 years and throw the bums out. because there's some other bums waiting to get some money. So we got to put them bums in. Like the whole thing is so stupid. I can hardly believe that we as a intelligent people, and we are, put up with it. It just amazes me.
Well, we've been putting up with it for far too long. Something that you can maybe talk about a little bit, Bill, and kind of explain to the viewers is just the nature of the ballot itself. So we've talked a little bit about the problems in Canada. Let's try and illustrate the ballot itself. What does right now, when you walk into an election, at least the provincial and the federal level, because obviously municipal elections are a little bit different. But at the provincial federal level, you walk in, it's a black and white ballot. It has the person's last name first, I believe, and they're arranged alphabetically, then their first name, and then the party that they're a part of, and then a white circle to put an X in. And that's it. That's the way it is. So it could be 50 names long if there were 50 parties that are eligible in your riding, or it could be 5 names long or 3 names long. And that's it. You get to put one X beside the name, and that's how the ballot stands today. How would you change that?
With a line, adding a line. See, the trouble with the system that we have today is when you put that X down there, it's illiterate. It tells the world nothing except that that person that was holding that pen put that X there. Doesn't say why, it doesn't say anything. But if you also give voters a line, an option to discipline with a line, then let's take in town here, we have Zimmer and Doherty, for example, in the federal. So let's say you're not happy with the man that's looking after you, or say Zimmer, and you go in there, but you're a conservative. You believe in the Conservative Party, so you go in and you put your X there because you don't want to vote for the Green or the NDP or whatever. You're a conservative. So you go in and you vote for the Conservatives, but then you draw a line through Zimmer's name. And you draw the line through Zimmer's name to tell the whole world that you don't like the way this guy's behaving. It does not cancel the X. It just tells you that you're an unhappy conservative. Now, if you go in there and you are totally dissatisfied with Mr. Zimmer or the Conservative Party or whatever the case happens to be, you go in and you draw a line either through Mr. Zimmer's name or through the party's name or through the whole works, depending on where your anger is, and you do not put an X down there. Now, instead of having to go across and vote for somebody who you don't like and supporting them, you get to keep your vote by not voting, but telling the world that you as a conservative are so fed up with those people that you cannot in good conscience vote for them. But in conscience, you cannot walk across the street and vote for the other guy either. Now, at the end of the election, you count up all the votes. Those that got the X's, you count them up. The one that got the most X's, they win. Then you look at the lines, and you might say, let's take the lines without an X. And the Conservatives lost, and they lost by 3%. And you count up the number of votes without an X, but with a line, and you find out that 5% of the people that voted did that. The Conservatives could have actually won if they'd have been behaving themselves the way they were supposed to, but they lost because it angered the people. Now you've got some intelligence in your election. People know what the heck's going on. Classic example in BC election, the last, I forget which year it was, but the NDP were taken to the point that they were not even a official opposition because they lost so many seats.
In 2001, I believe.
Yeah, there were so many of those ridings that were strong NDP, but the people were so angry at the NDP that they had to vote for other people. They were still NDP at heart because the next election they won again, but they were still NDP at heart, so they had to go in and vote for the other party. Now, Beacon Hill, I think, was one of them, if I remember correctly. It's in the book, but it was one of them. And I think the separation was something like 20 votes or 30 votes was all. So if you'd have had my system and you could have gone in as an NDPer and put an X and drew a line, or not put an X and draw a line or whatever, and not give it to another party, there's a good chance the NDP would have won enough seats to remain the loyal opposition. They'd have probably still lost that election, but they would have been an official opposition. You'd have had things running a little bit more like government should run.
Mm-hmm. No, it's incredible how quickly how much people's dissatisfaction, because it is just a single block of vote, right? Like a vote's worth, I guess you could call it. Right? There's no distinction, and without the distinctions, you have to earn a person's whole vote. The threshold's actually pretty high. You can't take pieces of the vote and have different realities come out of those voting patterns. And for that matter, it lacks metrics. You don't get any metrics out of it, because you just get yes or no. You don't get a yes but or no but, right? And you don't get any kind of distinction.
And that's a humorous part, because when the election is over, the politician tells us what we meant by our vote. They haven't got a flipping clue. When Harper won the last time, and he had, I think it was 26% of the popular vote, but he won. And he said to all of us, we have your mandate. This is what the people want. No, 76% of the people didn't want it. But because of the stupid system that's there, he was just going by the exits and the fact that he won. But he didn't have a clue why so many people didn't vote for him. Nothing, no knowledge at all. And like I said, you wouldn't run a business that way. Why would you run a government that way? Use a classic example of a fast food store downtown. We have our elections usually on Tuesday. So if Wednesday morning, a fast food store went to open up and found that none of their customers were there, they were all across the street at the other fast food, they would want to know why. They would do some investigation. But when it comes to politics, they say, oh, well, we'll wait 4 years. We'll get them back again. They couldn't care less. There is nothing stupider than politics. There's nothing smarter than politicians. But there's nothing stupider than our system.
Certainly very wily are politicians, and shrewd at getting their way.
I've met lots of them, and boy, I'll tell you, some of them are very, very impressive. Very impressive. Mm-hmm. But it isn't long before the system destroys them. But when they go in wanting to make the world a better place, wanting to serve their people. But because of the stupid system we have, it isn't long, and you either do as you're told or you're out. And you can do more when you're in than when you're out. So most of the time you bend. And you give up being like your friend. You give up being who you are on the misconception that you'll be able to do some good because I'm still there. But you can't.
It's an old chicken and the egg problem. I was actually going to bring this up with you. This is an ongoing debate, particularly amongst in right wing circles. There are left wingers who are very interested in vote reform, but most people on the left, not all, but a lot of people on the left are still pretty comfortable with having a big government. Whereas on the right, that's usually more suspicious. There's more people on the right who are suspicious of it than on the left. Wasn't always the case, but is today. And so one of the chicken and the egg arguments is, well, maybe the voting system we had was good enough when government was small, but now that government is big, things need to change. And then people argue, should we just change the voting system to fix the government? Or did the government need to shrink again? Does it need to shrink now? Or did it never need to grow in the first place? And that's what went wrong. It's a chicken and the egg argument. Is it the philosophy of government or the philosophy of voting? Which side do you kind of fall on that question?
Well, I think it's both, or I think it's all. I mean, it's how best to word that. You stumped me for words for a second here. Let's just leave that sit for a minute, and I'll come back.
Not a problem. I think personally for myself, I keep hoping that government wouldn't have grown to the size that it did. But the problem is that it also grew for a reason. I mean, and you and I have had this debate before when it comes to say socialized medicine and other things. The issue is that now that we're here, there's not really much crying over spilled milk. You can't really change what happened. You can't go back to a world where, you could pay for your medical procedures in goats instead of money, because that did happen. It did happen in the pre-public system that we had. There are still stories of people paying what they could afford, and doctors basically using, just as we use a progressive tax system, essentially using a progressive fee system where they charged people what they could afford for what what they could pay. And yeah, the middle paid, and the rich had to, had to pay a bit more, and the low had to, well, they could scrap together what they had to scrap. Like, that was how it was. And now we have a public system where we all pay taxes, and then doctors make the same whether you're a rich guy with a back problem or a poor guy with a back problem. And I understand that the system evolved to this for a reason, and we get that. The question becomes, do we have the kind of the strings in it and the structure in it and the architecture in it to make it effective, or are we going to just slowly but surely, like kind of every civilization, kind of head down the hill into just being so bogged down with bureaucracy and people who aren't actually doing the work but taking some of the value away? That's going to just get to us the same way. And was that preventable, or can we turn back now, or is there a way out of the situation we are today?
Well, I think oil is a good example. When I was a young man, I lived in Whitecourt, Alberta. Gasoline at that time was 42 cents a gallon. We got our gas from Edmonton. It was 100 miles. So you paid 2 cents a gallon for transportation. If you moved up the highway 100 miles to Valley View, it was 44 cents a gallon because you paid 4 cents for the transportation. Everybody knew what was going on. There were sets of rules that everybody followed. Whereas today, using oil again as an example, you haven't got a clue what's going on. Not a clue. I'll give you an example. I used to fuel up on First Avenue at the Mohawk station when I was heading south for projects and jobs. And I would also stop at 100 Mile House at the Mohawk station there. They both got their fuel from the Mohawk plant out here on across the river. And quite often I paid less for the fuel in 100 Mile House than I did on First Avenue. And they said to me, well, that's because that Mohawk sells more, which is an absolute lie. When you put an oil company's sign over top of your business and sell their product, they pay you for that advertisement. And they pay for it by letting you buy the fuel at the same price, whether you sell 1 gallon or 1 million gallons. You pay the same price. That keeps you competitive. But you're paying for that sign that's up there, basically. That's what they're paying for. Nowadays, the whole thing is corrupt right from word go, because nobody has to tell the truth. Whether it's oil companies, whether it's the First Nations business that's going on right now over there in Kamloops, no matter what it is, all of it's about how much money can we get and put in our pocket. It's got nothing to do with what's right or wrong. So how are you going to get back there? You have to do something that allows the average person who knows better to have input. And the only way to do that is you have to change the ballot. You cannot keep going with what you have. What was it Einstein that said? Insanity is to keep doing the same thing, expecting a different turnout every time. Can't do that. You have to go back. You have to change the system so that the average person who has intelligence has an ability to help run the country.
Maybe that's another aspect of it. I mean, it's a slightly different topic than the value ballot itself, but it kind of ties in philosophically with what we're talking about, which is that life seems to have gotten kind of so complicated that it does seem like little people and average people can be left behind very simply. In fact, it can affect all classes of people. That the skills of yesteryear, and even kind of the wide open space of yesteryear. I think Flannery O'Connor, the great novelist, once put it as, they'd both gone to university and they couldn't do anything. Speaking of the children of the protagonists in the book, but her father had barely passed grade 5, and he couldn't, and there was nothing he couldn't do. And so, I mean, that's a times changing sort of statement, I guess. But it feels as though part of the reason, just like our economy, which is requiring more and more of us for perhaps less and less pay, certainly more busyness and more education for not necessarily wages that will actually afford anything, but simultaneously, it seems like that maybe is happening in government as well. So we have this illiterate ballot, but the reason that nobody wants to change that is they like the power they enjoy, where the experts are running things. The experts are in charge. We saw this with COVID. The experts have been in charge running this country for 15 months, 18 months now. They really like being in charge. and yet they've been wrong over and over again, but none of them have been taken to court, none of them have been tried, none of them have been been put up for scrutiny over their decisions.
Very true. In life, nothing stays level. It either increases or decreases. Now, when it comes to government and oil companies and COVID and the whole business, it has become more and more corrupted because there has been nothing in place to stop it. We have, for example, we had a judge in town here that was handing out sentences to people, sending them to jail or all kinds of stuff. Then he finally ended up in jail himself for being a pedophile. Now, not saying that all judges are corrupt, but the bottom line is that there was nothing ever put in place to stop the corruption. It's allowed to happen, whether it, especially with money, the rules, they just keep changing the rules. Nobody goes to jail. Nobody. And the bigger the, well, look at that terrible disaster in the Gulf of Mexico with that oil spill. What did the executive of that company do? He jumped on a plane and headed for Europe, where he was in the Gulf course. To hell with what was going on in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, if you want to stop that kind of stuff, you see, it should have been that he should have gone to jail. But that doesn't happen. If I do something, or one of my kids takes my vehicle and does something, I become part of the responsibility that has to pay for all that. But not the way we have set up governments or big businesses. They are scot-free. And you can't have anything but corruption when you allow people to be scot-free. You have to change, first of all, the voting system. Because once you start to draw the government back into line, then the big business, like say an oil company, what's the sense of them supporting that politician, paying for his way, if he has no more power? You start to change the whole thing. You start giving it back to the people who actually live in the country. And that's big business and everything.
It's funny because we just have so many instances of people walking away scot free while some little guy takes the fall for it. I mean, it's happened politically. I believe I'm thinking of Pierre Poutine and a bunch of other poor staffers that every now and again get victimized by an oversized juggernaut called the Conservative Party, let alone the other parties. And it happens here at home with people getting blamed. In fact, actually, an interesting reference would be when John Diefenbaker went and defended that poor kid who had supposedly been the reason that the soldiers all died on their way to Korea through the not Rogers Pass but through the Yellowhead when the trains collided because the tracks weren't properly switched, and the railroad company was attempting to railroad that poor kid into a life sentence for having effectively committed 85 counts of manslaughter. And John Diefenbaker got him off. Prime Minister John Diefenbaker, eventually Prime Minister John Diefenbaker got him off. But so there has to be advocacy for the little guy. Do you see any advocates for the little guy in our current system? Are there people that you look up to in our federal or provincial system that seem to be fighting the good fight? Or do you think that we're going to have to change the balloting system first before we get those kind of heroes?
There are a lot of people out there that I respect. But because they have no teeth, they cannot change the system. And that's the bottom line. If you just keep leaving everything the way it is, it can only become more corrupt. It's not going to get better. How many times, just as an example, how many times do you see lawyers in court for some offense in their court case? Because you can't get a lawyer to speak out against another lawyer, or a doctor, or whatever. You see the bottom line in court because everybody's willing to attack them, but you never see the top side of it. So the corruption is everywhere. Now, I'm not saying all doctors, all lawyers, and the rest of it are bad people by any stretch of imagination, but there is no accountability. 2019, there was 35,000 deaths in Canada from poor diagnosis of medicine. No court cases. How come? Now, if there was 35,000 deaths because of poor tires, do you think there'd have been court cases? Lots of them. How come certain parts of society are not held responsible? and we have no way to hold them responsible. So now we'll just go back to the government, which is the most important aspect in our life because they influence every bit of our life. And we have absolutely no input whatsoever except that illiterate X. And when it's all done, you might not even have voted for the party that you want. You voted for the party to discipline the party that you want. Can it get any stupider than that? I don't think so. I don't think so. But we leave it, we keep it. I'll give you an example of Carr, I think was her name, was the lady that was looking after the Green Party of BC at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And she brought up the Green Party president or whatever from New Zealand to show us how well the system works with single transferable votes and the rest of that type of stuff, proportional representation. And the example he used was medicine. They were going to fix the medical system that they had down there. So I think if I remember correctly, there were 7 parties. 3 made up the government and 4 made up the official opposition. So the 3 in government, first of all, got together and they made up all kinds of rules and regulations or decisions of how they should rectify it. Then they gave it to the opposition, and the opposition looked at it and made a whole bunch of amendments and changed it all around. And they finally got to a point where they thought, well, maybe we can agree with it. Took it into Parliament, and nobody could agree, so nothing was done. How is that different than our first past the post system? No different. As long as we do nothing to change the way we are governed, we will always be governed into stupidity, because that's what we're heading for, stupidity. And I've met Frank Overly, I've met Mr. Zimmer, I've met lots of, I think Mr. Zimmer, if I remember correctly, he's a school teacher. So you don't get a lot of places without having enough of a brain to pass exams and study and do all that kind of stuff. So these people are not stupid, but they are stupid in the sense that they accept this stupid system. They are an abuse to this country because they accept this stupid voting system that has taken us from whatever it was in 1920, which at that time in my book I also mentioned, back in those days, most people couldn't read and write. But if they were entitled to a vote, then there was maybe a symbol or a color. When they went into the voting booth, they looked for that and they put their X. So therefore, X was a valuable tool. But now we're not stupid. We're well educated. So when we walk in there, lots of us walk in there with an idea or a concept or a concern, but we're still limited to that illiterate X. That's all we get. And then we're told to just suck it up. Or like when Harper got 26% of the vote, and he said, this is what the people want. Instead of him saying, whew, that was close. Damn near lost that one. But oh no, this is what the people want. And on they go with their lives. And we sit there and wait 4 years to do it all again. Another 4 years and do it all again. Like, where's the logic in our lives? There is none. We're just accepting this goofy way of doing things.
Well, no, I'm always happy to hear your opinion on these things, Bill. You know that. I think that's something that's kind of interesting as well when it comes to the way that we might do balloting differently, as well as and organizing the country differently, is that it's also kind of just a big place to try and have a one size fits all sort of policy. We might have a small population, and certainly government needs to be run by someone who's in charge. We can't have a lack of understanding about who's in charge. You can't be, Joe this week and Bill that week and Henry the other week. We need to know that somebody is in charge of something around here, and somebody's office is their office, and this is their constituency. None of us want to be the citizens of some other country every other day of the week. That would be very confusing. But at the same time, I think that's perhaps part of the problem, is that just like centralization of power has occurred in these political parties and a lack of responsibility and a lack of consistency, the other thing that's gone wrong is that it seems like they keep trying to impose ideas that would work maybe in Toronto or work maybe in Vancouver, but they're not going to work everywhere. And maybe that's another way that the second part of the ballot would help. How would that? Do you think that would help, that people in non-metropolitan parts could express themselves and explain how they're frustrated with things?
Oh, definitely. And to be fair to the people in Vancouver, A lot of those people want the same thing that we want up here. And lots of times they would join us in that petition, or not the petition, or expressing their point of view in Part B of the vote. It isn't just because they live there and we live here. Most of the time, it's because we are manipulated. And provincially, they will manipulate it for where the major population is at. Federally, they'll manipulate it for where the major population is at. Changing the system so that you still have one person in charge, a prime minister, and then all the rest of the people, but giving the people a voice is what you need. Without that, you've got nothing. You've got absolutely nothing. I mean, why? I had two university students who both were graduates of political science. One graduated here from the University Northern British Columbia, and the other was a student out of Ontario, and I forget which university he had attended. But both of them told me that they don't vote because they said it's a waste of time. But they said, if your system was in place, we would vote because it gives you an input into it. You're not just a dummy casting a vote to see who. It's like a dartboard, throwing a dart to see who wins the election. I mean, it's so stupid, it's unbelievable. You wouldn't run your family that way. You wouldn't run your business that way, but we run our country that way.
And it's interesting that you point out that hopelessness too in reforming the system or having the system work by those political science students. That I must admit that I get pretty cynical about it as well. And so it's funny to know that there are plenty of people, perhaps even a silent majority of people, that are finally fed up and maybe things could change. But further to that, the idea that voting, even just voting, like people just don't feel like participating because they don't feel like it makes a difference.
Very, very true. And it's the surprising part of what I've learned from all of this is if I talk to the people in charge, whether it's the professors up at the university or political parties, whatever it happens to be, none of them want to do anything about changing the system. But if I talk to people in the street and I start telling them about my system, right away they say, hey, that's a good idea. I like that. But those that are already in comfort don't want to lose their comfort. They don't want anything changed. They want it to stay the same. I was talking with a logger one time about this, and he's a very successful logger. And finally, he said to me, for God's sake, he said, leave it alone. He said, I'm doing quite well, thank you very much. And that's exactly what's wrong with the system. Those that are doing well will keep on doing well. Those that aren't are going to suffer like hell. Unless we change so that ordinary people like you and I get a chance to have a solid input, not to the point that you could hold a gun at their head and say, you have to do this, but to hold the gun that says, you have to look at this, you have to study this. Then, once we've come to a decision of whether we keep it or not, then we move forward from there. But as it stands right now, there's nothing you can do.
Very little. Very little. And I think that's maybe a good place to kind of end on, in the sense that if we want to change the system, we want to learn more about the system that you're proposing. Where do people go? Do you have a copy of your book there, Bill, that you can show everybody on the screen?
That's what I just
Look at you. Look at that. That was well timed.
Wasn't it? It's on Kobo and Amazon. And I recommend the digital. And the reason I recommend the digital is it's cheaper. I recommend it on a Kobo because they're both the same price, BC or Canada, United States. But you have to pay the exchange in the United States. So why not buy in Canada and pay just the $5? The second reason I like the digital is every copy that's sold is recorded in Ottawa. Then I can go back to them with a tool. As of now, I don't sell them. For whatever reason, people are not interested. They don't buy them. So when they say to me, well, how many books have you sold? And I say 10. Yeah. And they turn around and walk away. If they buy digital, it's delivered instantly to your computer and it's instantly recorded. I don't mind fighting for you people. I don't. But I have to have a tool that gives me some power. And the sale of this book is that tool that I need. If all of a sudden I went in there and I had 5,000 books or 10,000 books sold, certainly I'm going to make some money off it. Not lots, about $1 a book, but I have a weapon to walk in there with and say, no, no, look, the people are looking at this. The people want it. And up until now, it's, well, come back if anybody ever gets interested in it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
No, it makes sense.
Very, very good book.
Very good book. Highly recommend. Don't even know this guy on the cover. Just letting people know. Letting people know.
Exactly.
Well, I'm very thankful for you taking the time with us today, Bill. Tell us about the value vote ballot. I'm not sure if you'd like to come back at some point through, maybe throughout the summer or whatever. We always need more content, obviously, and we could talk about some other aspects, maybe even some of the stories from the past, where you saw people organize for the better and organize for the worse, and how things went in that respect. But I'm just very thankful for your presence here today and giving us a view into how we might make Canada, Western Canada, BC, a better place.
Well, I thank you very much for the opportunity. I've traveled around the world in the Navy. I love Canada. I would not want to see Canada go down a path that can't come back on.
Agreed. Well, thank you so much, Bill, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Well, that was Bill Barnes talking to us about the value vote ballot. And as he explained, you can find it on Kobo and on Amazon. Simple $5 for the book, and it'll help explain exactly what he means by both the first and second sections of the value vote ballot and how that might move forward. As we kind of close out the broadcast today, we've got a few minutes here. I kind of want to visit a couple of points again. One of the things I want to visit is just kind of riffing off of what we just talked about. There are a lot of questions about how Canada needs to move forward. And I understand, of course, we're on the sovereigntist channel here. We're on the separatist channel, depending on which way you want to say that. The secessionist channel. And again, I've been very clear from day one that my own opinion of sovereignty and the West separating is rather ambivalent. I believe that Canada looks like a pretty good country from space. I like the borders external that we have. I like the wealth that we have as a country. I think that almost all of our internal divisions are entirely built around the fact that there are people just knife fighting with each other over things that are kind of silly. It's all about power. There's a lot of corruption. But I think that Alberta really does have a future in Canada. So does BC. So does the rest of Western Canada. So long as we can really reform Ottawa and the ways that we go about things. And for that matter, our own provinces, because I remain very, very stern and firm on the idea that quite frankly, BC, even like I'm from, again, I've told you guys many times before, I'm from the northern capital. That's called Prince George. Plenty of people here in BC don't really like they don't like even northern BC. They don't like the big urban center that is Prince George. Some of the rural places have problems with the big urban center. All of us have a problem with the southern western part of the province called the Lower Mainland, and even the Lower Mainland has a problem with Victoria. So that's not new. I mean, BC's a pretty divided place, and so is the rest of Canada. I'm pretty sure people in Trois-Rivières got a problem with people in Quebec City, got a problem with people in Montreal, got a problem with people in Toronto. That's life. But deeper than all that, at least in my perspective, is that therefore we need kind of lines in the country that better appropriate the country, which would mean pretty much literally recutting the provinces, a lot of which were done in complete convenience. The only provinces whose borders make complete sense from their time period is, of course, Newfoundland and the Maritimes. Quebec was just along the St. Lawrence Seaway. It had nothing to do with the rest of northern Quebec. Same with Ontario. It was just along the Great Lakes. It had nothing to do with the rest of northern Ontario. And these provinces have become massive and have all this power, both politically from their populations as well as kind of geographically from their size of their provinces, that are just kind of nonsensical. And the same is kind of true in the rest of the West. Manitoba started a postage stamp. So did Saskatchewan, I believe, at one point. Alberta, I think, came in and was grown from a postage stamp upwards. BC is actually the only province that came in with all of its borders intact. So the fact of the matter is that we've always had these struggles. And quite frankly, we need to kind of reappropriate our land in order. And I mean, that's kind of funny because it even comes up on the Aboriginal question as well. I mean, the entire argument of the Aboriginal question is, hey, the land that we kind of wanted or actually used to inhabit is no longer our land, or we're arguing about which is whose land is what around here, whose line is it anyways, whose land is it anyways. That argument has been going on for a while, and the issue at hand is, how do we reappropriate the land and make sure that people are feeling a sense of belonging in the geographic location that they call home? It's an ongoing debate. I mean, there's a really micro way of thinking about this. If you've ever moved into a new home, even if you've just moved into a new apartment, hell, if you've just moved into a dorm with some new roommates, like, you have to establish your boundaries and you have to make it your own. You have to feel like you have a sense of belonging and a stake. You don't just sleep on a park bench at university. You don't do that. Like, and even if you did, you'd probably start customizing the area around the park bench that you're sleeping on. I mean, we see this with the homeless populations that we do have inside of Canada, the transient populations that we have here in British Columbia, and the kind of unhoused population that we have here in downtown Prince George. There is a culture that develops, because that's what people are. People are culture building machines, and being a culture building a creature that exudes culture, the moment that you come into contact with anything, you begin to try and customize it and bring it into your understanding and treat it in a way that makes sense to you. You've done this with the home that you've moved into. You've done this by painting a fence or painting a wall or renovating your house. That's all very, very commonsensical. Everybody knows that. The moment you come into possession of something, you begin to kind of shape it into your own item. That's what you do, not even abusively. You want it to be a certain way because you just prefer it a certain way. I'm a gun owner. The day I got my gun, I started sighting it in, changing it, putting the stock in the place I wanted it to be on my shoulder so that it felt better when I was shooting it. That's what you do. The moment that you pick up any kind of tool, whether it's as large as a house, or I guess even a country, or as small as, a hockey stick, you start forming it to be according to your understanding of it and your cultural understanding. But the issue at hand, when it comes to the future of Canada, is that we just have so much potential, and yet we waste it all away on so many fights between each other. And that's where things go wrong. And we need to think about that. And how do we change that? Well, I think that Bill's proposal has a piece of the answer, that the voting system itself isn't working, and that we need to be able to keep our candidates under better scrutiny and keep them more, honestly, just more convicted, more responsible and accountable to the students that they have. Or the students, well, they can be teachers, I guess, at times. You know why that is? Because we're just talking about Bob Zimmer, and he's a teacher, and therefore we're all his students. Get it? But they're representatives, right? The citizens that they represent. And so the issue is that we have to find a way to keep people accountable while also not grinding the country to a halt, because that won't work. And simultaneously moving forward into a better and more equitable future. That's possible. And I don't think that, I remember a couple of days ago, I was called a socialist on this program by somebody in the chat for musing out loud that perhaps, one man shouldn't own 10 houses. Perhaps 10 houses should be owned by 10 different individual families. That was just a thought. And that everybody needs a stake in their country. And if you create a system where there is just one man who owns 100 houses and the next 99 families have to rent from him, it doesn't take long for the next 99 families to get a lot of resentment and start wondering about whether or not maybe they should just take those houses from the one man who owns them all. And that is a reality. That's a reality. That happens in other countries all the time, where the class divisions become so strong that people feel like they have no chance of moving up in the world, and therefore they must seize the means of wealth, seize the means of production, seize the means of housing and everything else, and appropriate it to themselves. That's how you get revolution. That's how revolution comes to be. So Canada needs to be careful on this count, because especially with the cost of living that's happening around here and the fact that wages just aren't keeping up. And finally, the fact that, again, we are just becoming such a stratified society. we could be very well headed towards that. It's no wonder there's so much dissatisfaction. COVID isn't helping, and some of the arguments that are happening aren't helping. None of that stuff's helping. So we need to be honest about that. But I think where I want to kind of jump off here, coming back into some of the other stuff that we were talking about, is one. There's some things in the comments here. Daniel Bernhard has been kind of giving me some thoughts here throughout the show. So let's walk through them a little bit. But there is the problem. Reform of even the USA system is all but impossible, but creating a complete new updated republic is so much more than the Band-Aid on top of Band-Aids that we will never be thrilled with. Yeah, a republic. This is probably the other part of the problem for me as the sovereignty question. I'm a monarchist, and I'm a monarchist through and through. Now, let's be clear. I'm also a Catholic who understands that the monarchy is kind of, well, I mean, for lack of better words, usurped. But that's not the point. The point is that I am a monarchist through and through, and I don't really want a republic because I have questions about the effectiveness of a republic. We live right next to a very dynamic republic, and I have questions about that system. I have a lot of respect for the Senate part of that republic. I do believe in a kind of second cameral system of government and the bicameral system that is elected or at least selected by lot, and that the people in that system, whether they're amateurs or they're professionals, help in a kind of regional sense when it comes to questions of government and a sober second thought. But I really respect the American Senate out of the three houses of their government and the three branches of their government. I like the Senate. But outside of that, I have questions about the American system, and quite frankly, I'd probably redistrict America. I'd probably cut up their states too if I was in charge of America, because they need to change things. So Daniel had that brought up, and North Run Grader said maybe it's time to do away with political parties and just elect independents and do away with immunity. I will admit that the idea of electing independents is pretty it appeals to me pretty greatly. I did run an independence campaign here in Prince George, along with some help from elsewhere, and we definitely gave them a run for their money. We definitely had them scared in the 2015 election. And being an independent is important. We need more of them. But the problem is that with independents, it's so rigged against them. It's so rigged against them. We would have to reform our laws completely, because quite frankly, the simplest way to look at it is that you can't get a Bernie Sanders if you're left wing watching this show, and you can't get a Trump if you're right wing watching this show. In Canada, you just can't. You can't. It's not possible. Can't be done. And it can't be done because of the financing systems that we have in Canada. So say what you will about the American system of elections, for that matter, of medicine, of everything else. In America, money talks and money pays and money goes places. And so you can get a Trump or a Bernie, because with Bernie, there was a whole bunch of small donations. With Trump, he basically just had the right analytics, and he did get donations for sure, but he did not have the corporatocracy on his side. They were backing a lot of other people, but he beat the corporatocracy, and he beat the Democrats and their corporate favorite, Hillary Clinton, because he had the right read on people, because he did the social media stuff that he needed to do to get elected, and because he did the rallies and he visited places where the votes count more. They count more in Michigan than they do in California. They count more in Pennsylvania than they do in certain parts of, in Washington and other places, and in New York. That's kind of what he did to get there. So, but in Canada, it just doesn't work like that. We have a very conservative system with a small c that is built around elites running the show. Extremely conservative. It's hard to change, and you had better be an established party that can print off perfect receipts, and you got perfect letterhead, and you got a lady at the desk who takes all the calls. Like, you need a lot of stuff going. You want to be an independent, that's fine, but you want to found like kind of almost a party of independents, a group of independents. They can't even share resources. Like, it's so difficult for them to build up the money necessary. You need to get elected in Canada. I mean, I'm kind of looking at my producer here. How much money federally do you need to get elected? $250,000, $250,000. That's your upper budget, anyways. Yeah, like $250,000. Like, I mean, so if you're going to do that for what are we at now? 338 ridings? That's a lot of ridings. If you do it for half of them, that's a lot of money. So I think that's a big part of it. We got a couple of other comments here. Nathan, I like the concept of more provinces / states within Canada's present external boundaries. One problem would be the bureaucracy created with many more capitals and governments. That's an interesting concept. I've had this debate with a couple of people on what would happen if we doubled or tripled the amount of provinces we had. It's like, well, now we got a whole bunch more representatives. That's just going to cost more money and whatever else. And it's like, sometimes the same people who make that argument, it's interesting because I hear it from both the right and the left. On the left, of course, they like the big states. They don't want a whole bunch of little states. They don't want that, they don't want that sort of system. But on the right, I hear that. It's like, oh, it's redundant and now it's just cost and everything. It's like, well, what do you think a small business is? Like, a small business is, if we all worked at Walmart, right? If we all worked at Walmart, then Walmart would have like 10 accountants in, I think, Kansas is where Walmart's based out of. Arkansas, Kansas is down there in the southwest somewhere in the United States, mid-southwest, to be clear. Not the true south, not the true west, not the true Midwest. It's the mid-southwest. But the point is that, if we all worked for Walmart or Costco or whatever, so we had like 3 stores that ran everything, right? There was the pharmacy store, the grocery store, and the hardware store. And they were just 3 big Soviet-style stores that we all worked for, and we just bought from each other's stores, and that's it. And the rest of us were farmers. There's farmers, police, firemen, and people who work at the 3 stores, and some doctors lying around. That's it. That's all there is. Well, then, there would never be another accountant, right? Like, there'd be like 4 accountants. There don't need to be any accountants because we all work for the same companies. Like, when you have small businesses, that's where you get 600 bookkeepers from in a population of 80,000 people. It's probably more than 600, but you get what I'm trying to say about Prince George. The point is, why is there even a bookkeeping business in Prince George? You could just have one person do all the bookkeeping if we all worked for the same 3 companies, right? It doesn't matter. You would just have staff hired on to help shuffle the paper around, but you don't actually need the expertise. Small and medium-sized businesses cause redundancy. That's what they do. They keep people employed vis-a-vis redundancy. That's not because what they do isn't valuable. It's just because that's the nature of having a small business, right? Every small business has their bookkeeper they go to. Every small business needs a front desk girl. Every small business has got some, young guy stocking shelves, and maybe he's going to marry the front desk girl someday, and then they'll have a family and they're going to start a small business, and then the process will repeat itself. This was how the economy used to work. That was the entire concept of the economy. It was actually incredibly inefficient in the sense that it had way too many repeat jobs within it, but it offered real service, and because a mom and pop shop could only get so big, it offered its services, and then you go 10 blocks the other way and there's another mom and pop shop. Why? Because, well, this was their district and that's their district and that's their district. But ever since basically everybody getting a car and having multiple cars, and then on top of that, the big parking lots around supercenters, as well as the death of downtowns between the growth of the suburbs and of course the poverty that has resulted from automating work and sending work overseas, we have a problem, right? We have a big problem where our downtowns are becoming full of transient people and with addiction issues, and we need to do something about our homelessness situation. And simultaneously, why would you want to go to 10 mom and pop shops to get your items on a Saturday? You're too busy for that. You and your kids are driving all over all week. You're going to soccer, you're going to flute lessons, you're going to drama lessons. Like, you're too busy. So of course, on a Saturday morning, which should be your time off, instead you all pile in the car and you go to Superstore or Walmart, and you buy from Superstore, Walmart, Costco, Home Depot. Why would you go to a mom and pop shop? You have to visit 2, 3, 4 shops in order to do the same amount of shopping over a longer period of time, when you could just visit 1 or 2 shops over a shorter period of time and get all your items. And that's the death of the medium and small size business, because it's incredibly efficient, but it doesn't keep a lot of people employed unless everybody thinks we can raise our families off of stocking shelves at Walmart. We all know we can't do that. We can do it a little bit. We can do it as a start, but that is not a long-term solution to the question of a family supporting wage, regardless of the dignity of the work itself. Hell, it could become the most dignified work on earth. Everybody could treat each other well, and nobody could be nasty to people stocking shelves, and that's great. But It's the actual pay at the end of the day at the end of the day on top of the cost of living. That's the problem. And for that matter, again, it would be incredibly efficient, but it's not. It doesn't give a diversity in the workforce and a diversity for our talents. And it doesn't, and the redundancy, therefore the only redundancy is government. And I bet you actually, if we look at exactly that the government is the last redundant thing on earth, it's the only thing on earth that's still employing more people than it probably should, while everybody else has either been eliminated from the game because of the cost of the market and the issues of the market, or they've been reduced to their atoms, where somebody's stocking shelves. Like in America, I remember somebody telling me about this. There was a guy who lived in America for a long time. He had lived in Kentucky, and he was really trying to get into the United States permanently. He thought about just becoming an illegal alien there because they had an entire system set up for that. You don't need your SIN number to pay your taxes. Like, you can do anything in America. Like, they have an entire parallel universe for non-documented migrants in their society. Both, of course, the majority of which are from Central America. But people just go to America and just get lost in America. They're just like, yeah, no, I said I'm here for a bachelor party and I just lived here for 10 years. Like, and the point that he made, though, was that because of the cost of things in America, because you can get a jug of milk for like $2, because you can get a block of cheese for $2, because you can, buy, I mean, the dollar menu in America is $1. It's not $3, it's $1. And so the cost of things in America are just so much lower than Canada, and the taxation system is different, that people with lower wages, as long as they don't have health problems, and we're not arguing that point, can actually do quite well in America. They can actually do really well. And so this is, really well. I just mean that they can survive better in America in a sense than they can in Canada, because the cost of living in Canada, which is just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. So what are we going on about? The point that we're trying to drive home here is that there's a lot of issues facing our country. And I do say our country by meaning coast to coast to coast. And that is to say all of Western Canada, all of Central Canada, and all of Eastern Canada. And of course, the Great White North that a lot of people ignore, which is probably our most promising hope. None of it, the Northwest Territories and the Yukon. There's a lot of resources up there. And quite frankly, if the ice keeps freeing up there, that's where there's going to be a ton of transportation and logistics future for a lot of things. But the point is, we have a huge amount of potential, but we just lack direction and vision as a country. And if we don't figure that out sooner rather than later, we are in big, big, big trouble. We can't go on like this. So I think that the fundamental point here, both at the Western Standard, where we're talking about this issue of sovereignty and how to assert ourselves as Western Canadians and how to make sure that we're getting a fair shake, but in a wider discussion, which was happening here earlier when it comes to, Bill's value ballot and the rest of it, I think that fundamentally at the bottom of it all, we can make a better country, but we have to get some methods that would lead to a better country, like accountability, like what would happen with that value vote ballot, but also with just a mentality change and with a fundamental conviction that we're all in this together and we can do something better if we try. If we work hard, we can do something better. So I think we're going to leave it there for today. I've got a couple of last points to make here. I'm actually going to give her a go and see if I can put up my own email. I think I did this when I was left alone the other week. Look at that. Hey, look, I put up my own email. My producer is clapping for me like I'm a little doggy who's learned to not wet the carpet. So we've got we got the email up here. Remember, I'm always looking for guests. We got a lot of content to generate every week. And I'm looking for guests. I need people on here. I hope that you can suggest some people that you'd like to have on here. There are some suggestions that we've had that we've tried to follow up on. Some of those people have been willing, some of those people haven't been. So always suggest guests, always suggest ideas. Hey, some of the commenters that are in here, I mean, I'd be happy to have some of you guys on. So just send me send me an email and be great to have you on and talk about these things. This is a popular show, right? We, in a sense, that it's the Vox Populi. I want the people's voice to be shared on this show, and so that's a big part of it. So do send me any suggestions that you have for people on our show, and what kind of way we should go forward with our guests and our content. Another thing that just needs to be noted is that, of course, the pipeline's coming on in a couple of minutes, so do stay tuned for that. I believe Derek, Dave, and Corey are going to be on the show today, so they're all going to be working on what's going on in Alberta and throughout the Western Canadian spectrum and what's happening. And I guess as a final point on my end, I'm thankful to have you all here. I'm thankful to have this platform, and I'm thankful again as we move into kind of week 10 here and onwards to be a part of the Western Standard and to have this opportunity to kind of start these conversations around how do we build a better country and a place where we have a stake in our future, because God knows it's not working right now. So how do we change that? How do we move it forward? How do we make it better? Thank you so much for tuning in today, and thank you so much for your contributions through the comments and everything else. We hope to see you again tomorrow bright and early. I've got Stuart Parker on, I believe, in the second half, and Aaron Ekman on in the first. So that's what we're going to be doing tomorrow, and we'll see you bright and early, 9 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Mountain. Thank you so much.